Alright guys, welcome to a camera comparison between the brand new ASUS Zenfone 6, Honor 20 Pro and the OnePlus 7 Pro. And right now I'm recording footage from each phone's front-facing camera, so let me know what you think of the video quality as well as the audio quality. To set the scene a little bit, I'd call this the contest of the affordable flagships. So first up we have the ASUS Zenfone 6, which at £499 has been a bit of a hit with this rotating camera system. We'll be comparing that with the new Honor 20 Pro, which at $549 has an impressive sounding quad camera setup. And thirdly, the OnePlus 7 Pro, which at $649 still undercuts most flagships and has a pretty great camera setup considering it. Okay, so front camera video, and because the ASUS can use its rear camera as the front camera too, it can record in 4K resolution compared to 1080p on the other two. Not to mention, we're comparing that phone's main sensor to the small front-facing sensors on the other two phones, so dynamic range-wise, it is a mile ahead. None of these phones have optical image stabilization on the front, so you get a pretty equivalent amount of shake when you're walking about. There's a pretty similar disparity when it comes to taking selfies. The highlights are much better controlled with the ASUS, while the other two phones seem to add a load of contrast to mask the lack of dynamic range, which is quite standard for front cameras. The other benefit of the ASUS here is that you can also use its ultra-wide camera on the front, and it's really wide. All three can do portrait mode on the front, but I did find that OnePlus's edge detection wasn't amazing versus the other two, but is definitely crisper than the Honor. Okay, the playing field becomes much more level when we flip to rear cameras because whilst the Zenfone has the same setup either way, the other two devices have far greater ones. In fact, all three have a pretty equivalent 48 megapixel primary camera. All three have an ultra-wide lens, but only the OnePlus and the Honor have a 3x telephoto lens, and the Honor goes one step further by also introducing a dedicated macro camera, which I'll come to. Both the Zenfone and the OnePlus can take 4K video at 60 frames per second, and just generally, if video is important to you, then things are looking good for OnePlus. The combination of its lens and color processing gives really great definition to the grass in this video clip, although it does have a slight tendency to exaggerate the red hues, as you can see here. All three are pretty well stabilized though. This clip right here is completely handheld. If you wanted to zoom in, Honor really comes into its own. The OnePlus doesn't allow you to use its 3x zoom lens in video, and the Zenfone doesn't have a zoom lens at all. In a similar vein, OnePlus also doesn't allow you to use the ultra-wide for video, although this might be a feature that'll come via software update. Also take note of how the Zenfone's ultra-wide is just that bit wider than the Honor's. For stabilization at 4K resolution, even though the ASUS has no OIS, I'd say that either that phone or the OnePlus does the best here. It's a really striking result all things considered. Of course, this gets even better if we lower the resolution to 1080p, and if anything, I'd say the ASUS outright takes it at this setting. All three phones can record slow motion footage at 240 frames per second, and well, OnePlus is miles ahead here. The Zenfone and OnePlus can also take 480 frames per second slow motion, whilst the Honor can do short bursts of 960, although it is using software interpolation to achieve this, so it's not quite as good as the real deal. I also took these three devices out at nighttime, which is where, in theory, the Honor should really come into its own with its mega-wide f1.4 aperture. If we zoom in on this bus over here, you can see that on the Honor you can quite easily distinguish the glowing text on the back, and also, whilst the colours do look great on the OnePlus, grain is definitely creeping in. There's a similar story here. All three look pretty good from a distance, but when you crop in, you'll see that this clock up top is most readable on the Honor, and that, whilst the Zenfone looks a little soft, OnePlus is noticeably noisy. If we flip that ASUS camera around again, it pulls ahead, as you'd expect. Compared to the other two front cameras, the Zenfone's rear is a little less phased by that fading light. The same is true for photos. You're getting almost DSLR quality selfies here even at nighttime. As that light dips further, you can see that the Honor is the most affected. It's lost any kind of definition in my beard. But just remember, that phone's strength lies in its rear camera, and when taking night mode photos, it really does light things up. You can see that whilst night shots from the ASUS have a pretty realistically dark, moody vibe, the other two focus on brightening the result, although I gotta say OnePlus's dynamic range and clarity really impress me here. With low-light photos, we almost have the opposite result to low-light video. OnePlus is the cleanest, sharpest camera. One thing that the Honor can do is use its telephoto lens while taking night mode photos, although what it gains in the ability to losslessly zoom in, it loses in the relative quality of this telephoto lens in low light. The Honor's crazy wide aperture only really comes into its own in super low light conditions, but when you do get there, it is miles ahead of the other two. It can see things where the ASUS and the OnePlus and my own eyes are barely able to. It also has a really bright flash, whereas this looks like an area of relative weakness for ASUS. Daytime photos, and for all three phones I've turned HDR mode on, although it's interesting to see how the three phones managed to make identical subjects look so different. Honor has a little more warmth, which I think benefits most of these shots, and the slight extra contrast brings out textures in surfaces, like the floor I'm sitting on here. But yeah, the general takeaway here is that for simple daytime photography, you can't go wrong with any of these three. Each also has a portrait mode, but because the OnePlus zooms in for portrait shots, you have to step further back to take them. The flip side of this is that if you did want to take really close-up portraits, then on the other two phones you end up so close that you can almost distort the face. Plus, OnePlus's colors here are really balanced. Alright, so each phone has an ultra-wide as well, and you can probably see the ASUS with its mega 125-degree lens, so that phone can capture the most compared to the other two with 117. In terms of dynamic range, they're all alright, although all three lose a fair bit of quality when switching from the main camera. Whilst both the 20 Pro and the 7 Pro have 3x telephoto lenses, the ASUS has nothing, so for capturing objects further away, ASUS falls apart quite quickly. Oh yeah, and another key advantage of the Honor is its dedicated 2-megapixel macro camera. Yes, it's only 2 megapixels, but it does mean you can get closer to subjects than almost any other phone out there. And not to be overlooked, detail. So if we take some of the photos and crop in 15 times, you can probably tell. Honor gets the most object texture because of its tendency towards contrast, but OnePlus has the cleanest looking shots overall. If you enjoyed this video, a sub would be massively appreciated. My name is Aaron, this is Mr. Who's the Boss, and I'll catch you in the next one.